Erwin?
I'm sorry, Danny. How is he?
Hello, this is my review for Rectify, Season 2, Episode 1. Rectify is an original series on the Sundance channel, now in its second season. Season 1 was 6 episodes long, and Season 2 is going to be 10 episodes long. According to Entertainment Weekly, they say, when whodunit is beside the point, which is exactly what this show's all about. This review will contain spoilers, so if you haven't already seen Season 1, I would stop now and come back later. Season 2 begins with the episode called Running with the Bull. I like how they use flashbacks in the first episode to show him and his prison life, while the other characters in present day are dealing with him in the hospital. By doing this, it lets us actually see some acting by Aidan Young as Daniel Holden, even though his character is in a coma. And so we see some brutalities happening in the prison with his next-door prison mate, and then we also see him having a vision of his friendlier prison mate, Kerwin, and the vision is of the two of them in a pecan grove. It's a really beautifully shot scene. One of the best things about the show is just how well it's shot, and also how slow it actually is. Typically, I don't like shows that are too slow, but here, by being slow, we get to really examine these characters and the relationships and the subtleties between each of the characters. Getting us to see Daniel's mother and his sister Amantha at his bedside while he's in a coma also lets us really understand his mother's motivations a little bit better. I mean, since season 1, we've known very much so that Amantha, his sister, loves him and has been fighting for his release. But I wasn't so sure about his mother until this episode. Here you really see that she really does care for Daniel, and she's not bad-mouthing him while he's in a coma. She's just really a caring mother, and she's caught in a really strange situation where she hopes Daniel is innocent. I was really glad to see Tawny in the hospital, waiting to see if she could actually visit Daniel. And I like the little interchange between Daniel's mother and Tawny, where at first you think that the mother's not going to let Tawny see Daniel, and then she says, you know, you really mean well, don't you? And Tawny is just so sweet. I mean, Tawny is an awesome character. I love the juxtaposition between Tawny and Amantha, where they both love Daniel, but Amantha is obviously a very kind of liberal, non-religious person, while Tawny is a very religious and spiritual and deep and emotional person. And just seeing the two of them is quite interesting. There's a great line where Amantha says to Tawny, at least he's been washed in the blood, literally and figuratively. And that kind of just sums up Amantha, because she's very skeptical of Tawny and religion, although she did witness Daniel's baptism in season 1. It's just a very interesting dynamic between these two ladies, because they're from polar opposites, and yet they share this love for Daniel. Amantha's character is nothing really new to television. However, I think Tawny's character is one of the most original and honest representations of a Christian or religious woman in a long time on television. Typically, when we see religious people or Christians in television shows, they're usually portrayed as either just really hokey or way over the top or kind of dumb. Here we see more of I would say almost like an innocent country girl, but she's not dumb. I mean, she's definitely got a very strong faith, and she asks Amantha if Amantha believes in God. And that really triggers Amantha's emotions, where Amantha says, you know, I don't want to talk about it. And that seems pretty realistic, because, I mean, talking about God in the year 2014 to most people in North America is a hot button issue. You know, people are either like really anti-God or really into God, and people just don't like talking about religion. So I think this is a great scene where we get to see Amantha and Tawny just interacting as honestly as they can, and without, you know, getting into any kind of harsh fight or argument. The humor in the show is also very subtle, like when Amantha says, excuse me while I go smoke a carton of cigarettes. I don't like shows that have laugh tracks. I don't like shows where they make it so obvious that it's a joke that you're supposed to laugh. I like shows where you kind of almost feel uncomfortable laughing, but you laugh anyway. And this show is totally doing that for me. The writing and directing of the show is just amazing. I mean, I love the whole shots of the rain. We see Tawny in the hospital in the rain from the outside, And then later on, we see the sheriff from the outside in the rain. And I like how the sheriff is really pursuing the people who beat up Daniel. This show is really a bunch of short conversations. There's a great line where the sheriff's partner just says, "Variables, Sheriff," referring to the fact that now that Daniel's in a coma, an induced coma, he could be a vegetable, and that could totally throw the whole court case in his favor. And so even if he is guilty, Daniel could get off scot-free by just being in a coma or being a vegetable. This show just does a really good job of not really letting us know either way whether he's guilty or innocent, and just giving us a realistic view of all the different possibilities that could be out there. Now, I know that the show only gets maybe 140,000 viewers, according to Wikipedia, per episode, but I'm really glad Sundance gave it a second season, and I really hope that there's room for a third season as well, and that people begin watching this show and telling their friends. With season 2 getting 10 episodes, they really have a lot more time now to build the story. If I have any criticism for the show, it would be that the mythology at the very beginning of season 1 wasn't really carried out. So I'm glad that they're having this scene with Bobby Dean, the guy that attacked Daniel, and they're showing him, run back to his mother. So they're really getting more into like the mystery of who attacked Daniel and getting the sheriff to find out pretty quickly. And I'm glad that they're not going to drag this out too long, because there is 10 episodes this season, and I'd hate to have this thing drag out for the whole season. So the sheriff and his buddy talk to this guy named Jake, who was an accomplice, and that's moving forward. And then we see this character named Trey, and Trey was in the very first season in part of that mythology stuff with the guy who killed himself. And I'm glad that we're getting back to that. And we see him grabbing the gun that was used by the guy who committed suicide. And so this is obviously going to play into like the bigger story of what actually did happen all those years ago when Daniel was convicted of murdering and raping his girlfriend. So if Daniel and his sister are the protagonists, then I would say that there's a number of antagonists. We have Trey. We have the guy who committed suicide, although he's now dead. We have the attackers, so we have Bobby Dean and Jake and the other attackers. We also have the sheriff's little sidekick, who seems a bit of an antagonist. Then we have Tawny's husband, who also seems like a bit of an antagonist. And lastly, Wendell, the guy in the prison who was involved in raping Daniel, and who also was in a pretty disturbing scene where he's masturbating as Daniel is trying to go into a mantra to avoid hearing him talk. And so he's an antagonist as well. I'm glad that they're kind of pursuing Tawny and her husband and their relationship a little bit more, and just showing the relationship is not ideal. Tawny's husband is now hiding stuff from her, and Tawny knows it, and it's getting uncomfortable in their relationship. Now, if Tawny's husband, Ted, wasn't such a douchebag, the scene with Daniel's mother and Ted in the hospital by Daniel's bed would have actually been quite sweet. But knowing what we know about Ted and the whole scene that happened in season 1 where Ted was egging Dan on about the rape in the prison, and then what Dan did with the coffee grinds with Ted, but knowing all that, and also knowing the relationship that Ted has with Tawny, and how it's not very good, that just gives this whole scene more of a creepy feel, because here we see Daniel, who may or may not be hearing what's going on between Ted and his mom, and it just seems a bit creepy, which is cool in a way, but it's disturbing nonetheless. When Ted is left alone in the hospital room with Daniel, this is one of the creepiest scenes of the episode, because we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, for all we know, Ted could kill Daniel, but instead he sees the little statue, and this is brilliant continuity, really. And then when Amantha sees him holding the statue, this is also a very tense scene, because we already know that Amantha doesn't like Ted, and there's just something about that statue, and Amantha doesn't know what it is, but hopefully they're going to eventually reveal the situation that happened with Ted and Daniel in the shop. The show tends to balance these heavier scenes with lighter ones, and the dream sequence with Daniel and his sidekick prison mate is a beautiful little scene, and it's shot really well, and it's quite, lighthearted and charming, and Daniel says, "I fought the mob and the mob won." So, Daniel's sidekick, Kerwin, he knows that Daniel is in a coma, and he's trying to instill hope in Daniel, and Daniel's saying that he doesn't really want to return to the real world.
I don't think I can do this. Everything out here is just so complicated. There's so much pain and hate. And I think I may just be... It's too broken, you know?
And the episode ends. At one point, Daniel says, "Everything out here is just so complicated. There's so much pain and hate." Overall, I like how this episode has given the show more room to breathe. It's given it, it's picking up the pace on certain storylines and giving more of a focus to the family because Daniel's in a coma. So we get to see Amantha and Daniel's mother. We get to see Tawny and Ted and even the stepfather, as well as the mystery surrounding the original story of what happened all those years ago. Some people may find the show dark or even boring or too slow, but if you listen this far throughout my review, then hopefully you're one that really enjoys this show and just appreciates the photography, the cinematography, and the writing, the acting, the slow moments, the character studies, as well as the progressively moving story. The show would end if we knew whether Daniel was guilty or not. And I don't even think that's really the point. The point isn't so much that Daniel is or isn't guilty. It's just more of how somebody deals with society after they've been in prison for so long and abused in prison for so long. And there's quite a few scenes in this episode where we see Daniel forced out of his cell. There is violence in the show, and prison is obviously a horrible place, but the real world is also not always going to be a bed of roses. And the show is just great in that respect because it's showing us humanity. That's my review. Hope you liked it, and I'll do a review for the next episode soon.